So let's talk a little bit about the sociological consequences of the revolution in Syria. Nobody is going to lament the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad and his government in Syria. It was a brutal and atrocious government. But that does not necessarily mean that the future for Syria is secured. A lot is going to rest on how the new, what is being referred to as the transitional government of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the revolution that overthrew Assad, and its leader Ahmad al-Sharaa, and how they're going to deal with what in sociological terms we refer to as anomie, the resulting anomie of the revolutionary overthrow. This is probably the most crucial period for that revolution. In many respects, overthrowing the old government, especially a discredited government like the Assad government, is the easy part, believe it or not. It's been 14 years, but this may very well be the easy part. The hard part is the governing. Right? The bottom line is one thing to be a revolutionary movement and as opposed to a governing authority. To govern, a group has to have what we call legitimate authority to govern, and part of that is going to be doing the mundane, routine stuff of governing, like making sure the sewers work, making sure people have access to electricity and life chances, making the trains run on time, right? That's going to be quite the trick. And the first thing that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is going to have to figure out is how to deal with the resulting anomie. Anomie, for those of you who don't know, is a state of normlessness. It's a period in which the rules binding the society together, the morals binding society together, are questionable. They're not clear. And what then ends up happening is a great deal of social instability. This is one of the oldest concepts in sociology, is this idea of anomie. And how do governments deal with anomie? Well, governments deal with anomie on what I refer to as a spectrum between negotiating with the major interest groups in the society and violence. Just simply imposing through violence one's authority. And what will end up happening is that the resulting government, the transitional government, will be making choices along that spectrum. Optimally, for a democratic society, you want to have more of the choices taking place on that negotiation end of the spectrum. You want to include and incorporate as many of these interest groups and as many of these power groups into your coalition of government as possible. This is, at least rhetorically, what Ahmad al-Sharaa has said he wants to do. On the other hand, there is probably going to be some smaller uprisings. There's probably going to be some cause for also using violence. And the important part of this is when the state uses violence to impose its authority, it has to make sure it's not crossing that line, that it then mars its own legitimacy and becomes basically accused of being another Assad government. So this is a really, really crucial time period for Syria and for the revolution. One of the problems that we see happening is what historian Howard Zinn once said: revolutions, once successful, often lose their taste for revolution. In other words, smaller revolutions or smaller instabilities going on in the society, oftentimes after a revolution, are brutally suppressed. And we can see that possibly happening in Syria, in which case what we're looking at is the beginnings of just another dictatorship, just another brutal totalitarianism in that country, and nobody wants to see that. From our position as Americans, what can we do? What we can do is we can lobby our politicians to do what they can to minimize the impact of anomie on the Syrian society. What are some significant sources of anomie in the Syrian society that the United States and foreign powers can have some influence over? Well, we've got one of the sources of anomie has to do with the conflict between the northern Kurds, typically a U.S. ally, and Turkey. That's going to be a huge problem. That is a potential source of increased anomie in that society. the rise of ISIS, and you know that a group like ISIS is going to try its best to fill in whatever power vacuums exist in Syria at this point, and there's going to be a lot of power vacuums, especially local power vacuums, as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham it imposes its authority and tries to legitimize its authority. There's going to be pockets where it's not going to be able to do that immediately, and ISIS can very, very quickly slip into those areas. The tensions in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights territory has not been resolved as far as the people in that area are concerned, and Israel has, again, a U.S. ally, has concerns about its possession of the Golan Heights, and they're going to try to secure their possession of that territory. And oftentimes, what they're doing is, actually making incursions into what is recognized as Syrian territory. That's going to increase the sense of tension and the sense of anomie that exists in that society, and can become the excuse for a military-style dictatorship. So these are things that are foreign influences and foreign impacts on anomie in the Syrian society that could tilt this revolutionary movement to taking a more aggressive and violent approach to establishing its authority and establishing its legitimacy. And that's not something that we want to see. We want to try to encourage Ahmed al-Shara to move closer to that negotiation end of the spectrum.